Good afternoon, good morning. Welcome everybody to this webinar on advancing social accountability in climate action. An opportunity for us to introduce the Green Accountability Community of Practice. We are really thankful to everybody for having joined us for this session. I think first and foremost, what we might want to do is to just go through the housekeeping rules, because amongst those will be some instructions in terms of interpretation, and maybe I'll ask Hannah to just go over those very quickly so we can get everybody on board, and then we can introduce the session.
Great. Thank you, Josh. Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. It's great to have you here to talk about this really important topic and to launch the community of practice. So just some housekeeping rules. We do have interpretation available for Spanish, Portuguese, and French. So if you click on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen, you can choose which language you would like to listen in. And just a note of caution to our speakers and to myself as well, to please try and speak slowly so that our interpreters can follow along appropriately. We do also have a Q&A box, and we encourage you to please post questions in that Q&A box. You are welcome to post in your own language. We will open for a short Q&A after our panelists have finalized their remarks. We are quite a large group today, so we won't be able to get to all the questions in this session, but we have allowed you to upvote on the questions in the Q&A box. So we will probably take hopefully around 3 questions and answer those in that session. And then we also have a chat function available. If there are any technical difficulties with interpretation, please do let us know so that we can sort that out and assist you accordingly. And just thank you so much to everyone for being here today, and I look forward to the discussions. Josh, I'll hand back to you to introduce our speakers.
Thank you very much, Hannah. And just to begin us off again, what I'd like us to do is maybe go through a little bit of the agenda so that we know what we have between now and 2 hours when we finish this webinar. But just, aside from welcoming you all again, and I'm hoping that everybody has no problems hearing us in whatever language, and I see that people are already on the chat introducing themselves. I would encourage that. We do welcome that, because at least we get to know who's here with us. Very broadly speaking, the objective of this webinar is to introduce the community of practice and also to explore opportunities to enhance transparency, participation, and accountability in climate policy, which includes climate finance as well. We also want to take a look at opportunities for promoting social accountability on climate action, especially given that this is the year where we have the road to Belém. We've got COP30 coming up, and also bearing in mind some of the outcomes of COP29, and we will have a chance to hear some of that in the scene setting that Dr. Shanaz Musa will be doing. So what we're trying to do with this platform very broadly is to improve the impact and equity of climate finance in certain countries that we have selected, namely Bangladesh, Brazil, Cameroon, Mexico, and Senegal. And we do this by supporting the integration of community, citizen, and civil society organizations' feedback into the climate finance decision-making space. So you'll be hearing a lot more about the community of practice, which we are actually here to introduce. But very broadly, the COP is designed to bring together civil society organizations, grassroots organizations, as well as actors in the green accountability space, to a platform that allows us to help the fostering of peer-to-peer learning and knowledge sharing, identifying scalable green accountability social innovations, as well as implementing coalition building strategies. So we're going to start with a scene setting from Dr. Musa, and then we will have a panel that will focus on enhancing transparency, participation, and accountability on climate policy, and including climate finance. We've got a list of quite esteemed speakers who I'll be introducing a little bit later on. Then we'll go into the meat of the community of practice, where Hannah, my colleague, will introduce the community of practice and talk about some of the mechanics behind it and how it will operate. Then we will have some time to have a panel discussion again with Glenn and other colleagues to explore opportunities for network building and collaboration through this community of practice. With that, we really look forward to a knowledge-filled session. As Hannah mentioned, we have a Q&A box, which we hope to use as we listen to our panelists a little later on. And for anybody who's got comments and questions, it would be great if you can populate them in there so that when we have time to address those, we can look at them. So without any further ado, I would like to welcome my colleague and fellow director at SouthSouthNorth, Dr. Shanaz Musa, who's going to do a little bit of scene setting, as I mentioned, and kind of give us context and solid grounding for this webinar. Over to you, Shanaz. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Josh. And before I start, I just want to thank the team who put this webinar together. It's all going, just absolutely smoothly. So thank you. So greetings, esteemed colleagues, and all of you attending from South Africa, and every best wish for 2025. Thank you for joining us as we introduce the Green Accountability Community of Practice. Special greetings to Dr. Francisco Gattani, who's the Extraordinary Secretary for State Transformation, Brazil, and to Mr. Ali Zulfikar Rahim, who's the Program Manager for the Global Partnership for Social Accountability. As we are beginning the year with a really important webinar, and the title, as we all know, is Advancing Social Accountability in Climate Action. This topic holds particular significance in light of the outcomes from COP29, where the agreed climate finance goal fell very short of addressing the expectations and needs of developing nations, and it was characterized by deep, significant disagreements. We believe this commitment is insufficient to effectively tackle the climate crisis we are facing. Furthermore, the tensions observed at COP29 highlight a persistent power dynamic that continues to reinforce imbalances in climate finance and responsibilities, and as Josh mentioned, the equity of the climate finance as well, and the impact and effectiveness. While the UNFCCC processes offer several opportunities for accountability, both horizontal and vertical accountability has not been shown to be robust. This lack of strong mutual accountability between parties undermines trust. Additionally, civil society's involvement in these accountability processes has been wholly insufficient. What this means is that the voices of the most vulnerable are often excluded from key policy processes and discussions. At this point, I think it's important just to note that the Paris Agreement does provide a framework for social accountability regarding climate action. And the LLA principles strongly emphasize the need to make the full project life cycle transparent to local stakeholders. And this life cycle includes financing. We strongly believe that social accountability can enhance policy and institutional frameworks for climate action and facilitate local level access to finance for climate actions. Currently, public climate finance it lacks clear transparency guidelines and accountability mechanisms, and is not well integrated with local communities, and even less so with the civil society. For us, green accountability is a mechanism, and it's more a mechanism that will create systemic ways for people to have agency in the climate decisions that most impact their lives. It places citizens and civil society at the heart of climate finance, and it also holds decision makers accountable for adequate and equitable climate finance that will lead to climate action where it matters the most. Enhancing transparency, participation, and accountability in climate policy requires novel and radical partnerships among stakeholders. And I smile because we're really getting into this radical partnerships. Such a partnership will help ensure that climate finance responds to the needs of those most affected by climate, and it makes investments in resilience building effective, accountable, and equitable. The Green Accountability Platform's new community of practice aims to strongly unite civil society, grassroots groups, and accountability actors for peer learning, shared knowledge, and scalable green accountability innovations. It will support coalition building and offer a platform for leaders to advocate in strategic spaces. The Green Accountability Platform is housed with the Green Partnership for Social Accountability within the World Bank. And the lessons, reach, and results from this community of practice will feed into the World Bank's forthcoming Civil Society and Social Innovation Alliance. Mr. Ali Zulfikar Rahim, that I introduced earlier on, well, I think he might touch on these during his intervention, which is later on. And in closing, we strongly hope that this community of practice will be instrumental in servicing good practices and innovations that advance social accountability in climate policy and finance, and especially given the world we're currently in. We invite you to join us on this platform and share your knowledge, expertise, and innovations to enhance social accountability in climate action. Because many of you on this webinar, all of this is a lived experience for you. So we strongly encourage you to join. And I thank you for listening to me. And I'm now handing over back to my colleague, Josh Ogada.
Thank you so much, Shanaz. And I think that really does lay a solid foundation for us to have this discussion. At this point, it's my privilege to introduce what is the meat of today's webinar, which is our high-level panel. A couple of esteemed guests who are going to be speaking to us today, and one of them, we are going to use the time during this panel discussion to explore a couple of key questions. One of them, why are we discussing green accountability now? How do we enhance it? And what do partnerships look like if we are focusing on enhanced accountability? So we're going to be hearing from different speakers here today. Mr. Ali Zulfikar Rahim, who's the program manager for the GPSA, who will be speaking a little bit about the civic priorities on enhancing social accountability on climate policy. We'll also be hearing from Dr. Francisco Gaetani, who is the Secretary Extraordinaire for State Transformation in Brazil. Ms. Avelina Ruiz, who is the Climate Change Manager at World Resources Institute based in Mexico. Dr. Zoneziwe Bongulo Wondie, who's from Women for a Change in Cameroon. Mr. Michael Jarvis, who's the director of the TAI Collaborative. And last but not least, Ms. Violet Chivutse, who's the chair and Africa representative for the Huariou Commission, who's also a partner in this work that we're doing. So I'm going to come to you first, Mr. Ali Zulfikar Rahim, to reflect a little bit around the work that GPSA does, the priorities being laid out there, and maybe touch a little bit on the NCQG and some of the work. I'm going to ask for all of the panelists to take about 5 minutes. And while this is happening, while the reflections are being made, I'm also going to ask all of our participants, if you do have questions that arise out of these presentations, kindly put them in the Q&A section so we can take full advantage of having such a wonderful panel to address some of those questions as they arise. Over to you, Mr. Rahim. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much. And can you hear me clearly, Josh and team? Excellent. Well, greetings from Paris here at the World Bank office. And, I just flew here from some meetings in London yesterday, and it took me back to the conference we had almost 2 years ago now at Chatham House on green accountability, sort of launching this concept and idea that civil society plays a critical role in driving both the prioritization, the delivery, and the outcomes around climate finance. So much has happened in those last 2 years, and I want to really thank SouthSouthNorth, Josh and Shanaz. I see Glenn from Huariou. I see my colleagues from World Resources Institute. I think this approach and the community practice is the next iteration of this approach, shows what it means to connect the local to the global and bring a serious discussion about accountability and effectiveness and the critical role of building the civil society infrastructure we need to do this into the global climate finance discussions. I didn't make it to the COP in Baku, but I know many of you did, and seeing where accountability was there versus where it has been in past years shows that this conversation is developing, and we're starting to aggregate lessons from around the world. And we see that challenges such as closing civic space and lack of financing and support for civil society organizations go to the heart of whether we'll be effective in reaching our climate goals. And I want to cast it broadly, and I know many of the actors here doing this work will as well. Civil society plays such a critical role across the spectrum of effective financing. It plays a role in building citizen trust in the collective action of climate change in the first place. There's very stark surveys coming out of Europe and the developing world about whether citizens believe in climate change. Well, you know, interestingly, most citizens and people around the world do believe in climate change. But when you ask them, will you support financing for climate change if it means diminishing other economic interests and livelihoods, you know, that consensus drops dramatically, not even to a plurality. And so I think we have to really build trust. I think at the heart of all of these debates, the whole climate agenda is this critical issue of trust. We are also in a global crisis and deficit of trust today. And, you know, we have colleagues here thinking deeply about trust, like my colleague Michael Jarvis from the Trust Accountability Collaborative and others. And I think today there is a crisis of trust, and a crisis of trust will keep us from our net zero goals, will keep us from a carbon neutral future. So I think the issue of trust, engagement, and participation is really at the heart of, can we make climate finance work? Can we enable governments to be responsive to their citizens in meeting needs? Do we have trust that funds will be well allocated, that the quality of this capital that we're raising will be deployed effectively, because it's a very narrow frame we have to achieve these goals? So I think for us at the World Bank, we're expanding what we saw in the Green Accountability Platform and the Green Accountability Community of Practice into our future work. This is really a proof of concept for where we want to go today. We have a new corporate commitment, renewed corporate commitment on civic and citizen engagement. It will be part of the World Bank scorecard, the new World Bank scorecard. And because of the actions of civil society globally as well, it is one of the 20 indicators of the quality and effectiveness of the bank's own work on delivering on a broad set of development outcomes. We're developing the framework and methodology for that, and this will be a public tool of account on how we ensure participation is a core part of how we deliver writ large climate and beyond in the World Bank. And then we also need to bring civil society solutions systematically into the delivery model of public international finance. And of course, the largest share of public international climate finance is going to be through the development bank system, both multilateral development banks, national development banks. This is really the core financial tool the international public system has. And that's why there's so much interest and attention on renewing the international financial architecture. We hope this platform and other work is driving attention to the fact that civil society and the social sector is as equal and as critical a player as the private and public sector in reaching these goals. And I think this is where this community of practice and the platform really offers us a new kind of civic architecture we need to build out. And I think the key thing in the localization agenda and the decolonization of aid agendas has given us very important insights of what it means to follow this core principle of subsidiarity, delivering services, partnering with organizations at the lowest and most local level possible. But we also need an aggregating effect. We need an aggregating effect effect nationally in countries to bring solutions across localities, often implemented by different and small organizations, but we need those network effects of impact. And in climate, this is critical, whether it's preserving carbon sinks like forests and partnering with highly local indigenous communities to replenish and protect tree stocks, to the restoration of mangroves, which affect coastal communities around the developed world. Civil society and community-based solutions are at the heart of getting this right. And this is a finance question. It is not just an inclusion and equity question in general. It's a question about getting to carbon goals. And I think this is what we have to emphasize, that inclusion and equity is actually key to also reaching those technical goals we need to reach to mitigate and adapt for climate change. So we will launch CIVIC, the Civil Society and Social Innovation Alliance, which Shanaz referred to, as the new vehicle succeeding the GPSA, and to build on models and extend the Green Accountability Climate Model, to build a new model for global health, bringing these outcomes in and approaches in, partnerships with civil society to ensure health quality and health delivery, starting with a focus on children, adolescents, and maternal health. And we will also look at youth and youth-led and youth-serving organizations in our approach. And we'll also look at gender and how the new gender strategy and gender priorities of the World Bank need critical partnerships with civil society. So let me end by saying the community of practice to me is such a core part of this architecture, and I think Shanaz was getting to this very eloquently, is that we need to aggregate all these local lessons from this platform itself, from many other areas of work, to ensure they're being channeled up into the fora where decisions are being made, that they're being assimilated when we talk about climate knowledge and climate effectiveness, that all these excellent local initiatives don't become islands of excellence and actually influence policy decisions, that influence finance frameworks, that then run from global to regional, to national, to local. So this is the new civic architecture that we need to build as a global community. And this will be one of many examples. But in the international finance system, last week in London, met with many esteemed colleagues led by the UN team that's looking at innovation in global governance. And sadly, someone had reflected in a prior panel, is multi-stakeholderism dead? I would say a resounding no. We cannot accept multi-stakeholderism to be dead, but we do need to think of new and innovative ways to bring partnerships and break down silos. So I want to commend SouthSouthNorth for some visionary thinking around this platform, and hopefully it can be a model of much more work to come. So thank you for inviting me here today. We're very proud that the Global Partnership for Social Accountability was able to be the financing partner and a collaborating instigator with many of you to build all this work. And we want to see a lot more. 5 countries is not enough, and I'll go back to the launch of the Green Accountability Platform at the COP in Dubai, where the head of the World Resources Institute, Ani Dasgupta, said beautifully, why are we doing this in 5 countries? It's very clear we can't achieve climate goals unless we do this kind of work in every country in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ali. And a couple of things that you mentioned there do stick out and frame this very nicely for us. I mean, you're mentioning the issue of trust, the deficit of trust as being almost the rationale for us talking about accountability. It's not accountability in response to nothing. It is the definite deficit of trust that we are facing. But also the idea of inclusion of civil society, not just as listeners or observers, but also a vital source of lessons, mechanisms, and tools and knowledge that can contribute to that multilateral space. And I think with that, having almost taken it from the global, it becomes hugely important to bring it down to the local. And we are extraordinarily privileged to have Dr. Francisco Gaitani, who's going to be talking to us a little bit about what this looks like at a country level, speaking to us about Brazil's priorities for advancing social accountability. And of course, Brazil is in the spotlight this year, hosting COP30, but also, the different lessons, Brazil's role in the multilateral process. So over to you, Dr. Gaitani. Welcome.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you very much for the invitation, for the opportunity for talking to you here. I'd just like to begin saying that today is a very important day for us. Yesterday, it was announced that the president of COP30. We have Ambassador André Corrêa do Lago. Maybe some of you know him. We couldn't have a better name for leading COP30. The debates in Brazil related to climate change, this year, they will be catalyzed by the path to the COP, which means that we are in the spotlight in double sense. We have COP and we have also our targets, our NDC. We are coming from a difficult moment, the recent past, where this agenda was abandoned, and now we are resuming it. But I'd like to begin mentioning 3 things that I think that we should take into account. First, the world is going a very sensitive moment regarding many subjects, and climate change is surely one of them. The results of the elections in the United States, again, we have the US out of the Paris Agreement, and I'm afraid that they are not alone in this process, not only as a country, but also in terms of the markets. Leading financial institutions are downplaying the importance of climate finance, which is, it was a little bit surprising, but for some of you, I'm sure that you are following the Financial Times, you see leading investors, finance institutions, dropping the importance of this topic in their agendas. And third, we are going through a world, we are living in a moment that multilateralism is going for a very difficult moment, probably the most difficult moment since the Second World War. And I agree fully with talking before about we have to look any sort of alliance, any sort of partnership, any arrangement that we can do to push our agenda. Why? Because we need to expand the ownership of this agenda. We need to stop to preach to the converted. We need to make our case continuously to different audience in order to engage citizens, interest groups, social movements, business, governments, local governments, multilateral institutions, this agenda. The major debates in Brazil now, we are trying to explain, to convince, and to discuss with our partners that we're not talking about an environmental agenda anymore. This is a development agenda. This is a survival agenda. This is a future agenda. And bringing green accountability to this debate means that we have to discuss these matters continuously, on daily basis, not in terms of gatos or circuits of experts. We need to gain the public. We need to gain the audience. In a moment that attention became a very scarce commodity. Brazil, as some of other countries in the world, we are going a very, very polarized situation. And the polarization has blocked, it has generated impasses, stalemates that make these debates harder. I'd like to say that climate change now, it's something that everybody's convinced about. It's not. And as it was mentioned before, every time we bump in a trade-off, the public opinion tends to favor options more connected with predatory growth and with the lack of environmental preservation, even in Brazil. So if we don't find a way to persuade, to bring people to third paths capable of conciliating development with preservation, we are in huge trouble. As you know, Brazil have Amazon in our territory. It's a huge responsibility. But it's a paradox that sometimes we have a better comprehension from our donors, from our international partners regarding our natural assets than within our own society. Brazilian society is split regarding our major assets, natural assets. We're not talking, I don't want to neglect the importance of the urban agenda, energy, transport, infrastructure, but we have one of the biggest natural assets of the world in tropical forests. But we have failed to build the case in our country in a consistent and sustainable way. This year, we have the leadership of President Lula, Marina Silva as our Minister of Environment. We have COP30 at the end of the year. We need to cross a Rubicon in this area. We need to make it a permanent concern. We need to make it how can I say, routine. We need to make it something normal, mainstream. We have so far, we have failed. I think that climate finance is important, but in our case, we think that ownership is decisive. Otherwise, even if you have resources, you don't have the right investments, you don't have the proper solutions in terms of policy environment-based policy making process. We're trying to bring together the Ministry of Finance. They are leading what we call the ecological transition. It's the first time in Brazil that we have a Minister of Finance adopting a proactive, an assertive, a constructive approach towards climate change. And with this alliance between the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Environment, the Presidents, the Foreign Affairs, we hope to push this agenda and conducing this interplay between the national and international agenda properly. Civil society is at the core of these efforts. Why? Because governments usually react, governments respond, but we have to gain our society and we have to gain the minds and hearts of our people to our agenda nationally and internationally. Otherwise, we will fail. And because of the confusion, because of the cacophony we are observing in the world today, the climate change agenda became more difficult to sell, more difficult to pursue, more difficult to institutionalize. And I think that we can't lose this moment. We're going through a moment of huge confusions between energy, digital, climate, inclusion, war. All these things are taking place at the same time. And we have to be as clear as possible regarding the path ahead. Otherwise, we will miss the momentum and will make things even more complicated in the near future. We have to bring the digital alliance to this process. Many countries are engaged in these discussions, trying to connect artificial intelligence with climate change. Technology is a huge source of hope in terms of achieving our targets, but we have to how can I say, introduce a sense of urgency in this process, because time is not on our side in these matters. Well, this is the first message I'd like to leave, to discuss later, and count on me to pursue these discussions further. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gaetani, and some really, really crucial key points that you make there. Amongst them is the importance of expanding the ownership of the agenda, bringing in more players and making sure that they're taking an active role. And I think that echoes some of the sentiments that Ali made earlier on, but also pointing to the worrisome trend of disaggregating the agendas, so having climate change on the one hand, development, whereas the bottom line is one of survival. All of these things converge in the need for us to highlight survival and what all of these elements contribute to it. But also positioning civil society at the core. I like your point around governments being quite reactive and the need for us to recognize that the initiative lies and should always lie with civil society and representatives of the people in driving things forward. Again, something that we need to bear in mind, even with the COP, and how we interact with one another is, as you say, the importance of technology and the power that has to bring people together, to help build movements, drive movements, share information. So we do thank you very much for those remarks. Lots to reflect upon. And just to, again, remind those of you who are joining us and listening that we do have the Q&A box. So if there's anything that jumps out from these interventions, please do pop it in there, and we will have time for our panelists to reflect on that as we go forward. Next, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and come over to you, Avelina. Ms. Avelina Ruiz is the Climate Change Manager at WRI based in Mexico. And hopefully you can share with us a little bit about the transparency and accountability processes in the multilateral space, specifically under the UNFCCC, and what opportunities and challenges those of us in the global South face in engaging in that space. So a warm welcome to you, Avelina.
Thank you very much, Josh, and for the SouthSouthNorth initiative. I appreciate and I feel honored to be with this panelist. I'm going to switch to Spanish because I feel more comfortable speaking in Spanish this morning. En el caso de México, y quizá no abordo la pregunta directamente del tema en la Convención de Cambio Climático. Lo que me gustaría hablar es un poco de la perspectiva desde México y sobre todo poniendo el énfasis en el tema de equidad. Pensando en que tenemos que generar consensos y confianza entre unas sociedades cada vez más polarizadas tiene que ver con un sistema cada vez más desigual. América Latina y México es uno de los países con mayor desigualdad. Tenemos 36% de pobreza en México, pero si eso lo vemos en las zonas rurales sube al 56%, y si pensamos que son mujeres indígenas, la proporción sube al 84%. Entonces, el tema de Green Accountability tiene que ver mucho con que esos recursos lleguen a las personas que más lo necesitan. Y en ese sentido, a distintos niveles nos parece que tiene que ver el tema de accountability. Por una parte está la NDC, cómo se construye la NDC, cómo se definen las prioridades, cómo se definen los indicadores y las hojas de ruta. Entonces, bueno, vemos procesos que no son participativos, en donde son procesos que muchas veces son más bien, digamos, para hacer un check de que se hizo un proceso de participación social, pero sin embargo hay muy poca participación en dónde están las prioridades. Entonces, bueno, necesitamos NDCs mucho más robustas en términos de hacia dónde tienen que ir las prioridades y con indicadores mucho más claros. Y a nivel local, muchísima más participación vinculada con las comunidades, en donde ahora en WRI estamos haciendo índices en donde podamos evaluar cuáles son las prioridades y cuáles son los principales riesgos que las comunidades y los productores locales tienen en términos de cambio climático, porque muchas veces eso está totalmente agregado y no es posible poder bajar proyectos que realmente estén orientados a estas necesidades. Entonces, vemos estos dos niveles, y en medio está todo un proceso de cómo se hacen las políticas y cómo se definen las decisiones de inversión. También tenemos procesos en donde las metodologías, la información no son suficientemente robustas. Vemos que existen taxonomías, vemos que existen metodologías para hacer un tracking del presupuesto. Sin embargo, estas no están digamos, no incluyen un proceso robusto de revisión en donde se incluya a los tomadores de decisiones, pero también a la sociedad civil, para definir qué significa sustentabilidad, qué significa resiliencia. Entonces, desde la parte de la construcción de metodologías hasta los procesos y las plataformas para hacer mucho más claros los procesos de monitorear el gasto y el financiamiento climático, es donde vemos que hay una brecha enorme en donde justamente se perpetúan procesos de inequidad y al mismo tiempo se incrementan los procesos de desconfianza en la toma de decisiones. Entonces, bueno, cerraría por lo pronto en este punto. Gracias.
Thank you very much for that. And, Avelina, just to mention, and thank you for the remarks you make, that listening to your outline of the situation in Mexico, I think we can agree that this situation and these conditions and these problems are mirrored in multiple countries across the global south. So these are all issues that we need to deal with. The issue of massive polarization. I think we are facing a world where that polarization is bound to increase either at local level and at the international level. And how do we work around that? And the need, obviously, with the reduced resources or the increased scarcity of resources with climate change, the need for there to be clear mechanisms, more accountability, more transparency in how those resources are allocated across populations. Problems of participation are problems that we face across the global south as well. The disarticulation between the real needs and the policy-making space, as well as the tools that we use to inform the research around resilience and sustainability. So thank you very much for those remarks. I'm hoping that we can pick up on some of those questions further as we go along and probably come back to that. At this point, I'd like to introduce Dr. Zonaziwo Bongulo Wondie. from Women for Change, based in Cameroon, is going to talk to us a little bit about integrating gender into social accountability processes, very important aspect, and how we can ensure that inclusive participation in policy and action can be put to practice. So over to you, Dr. Zoniziwo.
Thank you. Good day, everyone. So thanks for the invite. I believe, this conversation around climate change, climate disaster is not new. And we do all know that for sure, the world is all warming, and it's warming very, very fast. And as climate crisis definitely intensify, social accountability and green accountability are issues that we cannot overlook. These are definitely core to addressing climate crisis. And we cannot talk about, climate crisis or climate policy without talking about finance. And everything, revolves around finance. Finance is a very, very important tool in terms of global efforts to limit the temperature rise to 1.5. And for sure, we can't talk about finance without looking at, finance for who, and from who and to what. So in this reflecting on the question that you just asked me, I'm looking at when we designing policies, climate finance policy, whose voices, what informs this policy, and that is what we work on at Women for a Change. With Women for a Change, our work is centered at the intersection of climate justice and health and gender. And over the years, we've followed the climate conversation with the recent one that just ended in Baku, Azerbaijan, where it was this deliberation and negotiation around having the commitments in terms of financing climate actions. And as a gender organization, we know very well that we cannot achieve gender equality in a very climate chaos world. And when we talked also about the negotiations and the discussions that we always hold with our different policymakers in terms of how to involve women and also youth in the conversation, we bring in the different perspective, the different lived realities of these women. For instance, for those who followed the constitution, the composition of the organizing committee of the COP29, you realize that initially when the presidency constituted its committee, there was no woman in that committee, and it's out of cries from civil society where they later on had women in the committee. Even from the statistics from those who participated in COP this year, it is estimated that 35% of delegates were women. But at the same time, you realize that those who were doing the discussion and the negotiations were mostly male. And the whole climate discussion have been monopolized by the men's voices. And we cannot talk about having a climate just society or a climate just world without having the voices of those who often are close to nature, of those who often face the realities of this climate disaster. And with the work that we do, supported by WRI as part of the Green Accountability Program, we are looking at how do we enhance gender equality into the climate conversation and into the climate finance conversation. And when we're looking at climate finance, we're trying to contextualize what do we mean by climate finance, because this is a term, a concept that is very new and up to date. We still don't have a clear definition what we mean by climate finance. And from the Cameroon perspective, what does that mean? And also, how does that relate to the day-to-day experience of a Cameroonian woman? How does that relate to a farmer? How does that really relate to the experiences that people face on a day-to-day basis? So these are the conversations that we have at the national level in terms of unpacking this discussion and looking at the climate finance. On what exactly are they financing? What activities? For instance, take food security. So how is that translating and also transforming the whole financial conversation in terms of affecting people's lives? So these are the discussions that we have at the national level, and we continue to unpack and bring in these different voices, because we cannot talk about a farewell where a particular group of the population experiences and voices are not part of the discussion. And we believe that in the conversation around gender just or a climate just society, it is important that there is an inclusive approach in terms of how we engage discussion addressing climate change. So just cutting bits and pieces to just make my point right fast. So I hope that I'm more open to more conversation and also provide input and more elaborate more on the work that we do on the ground, how we bring in gender, both at the local level when it comes to climate conversation and how that connects to the global level, and also how we bring that conversation from the global level back to the local level. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. And I think the important thing coming out of this is, again, positioning gender as a cross-cutting priority in this discussion. You mentioned issues around equality and the importance of the continuing drive to ensure that, but also recognition of the differentiated impacts. We talk about differentiated impacts of climate change and how those affect women in specific ways, and not just as an affected group, but also a group that must always be included in leadership and discussions around climate change and solutions around building resilience and the rest. So thank you very much for that intervention. At this point, I'm going to switch over to Michael, who's the Executive Director of Trust, Accountability and Inclusion Collaborative, who's hopefully you're going to talk to us a little bit about partnership and collaboration and the opportunities that exist for this, for civil society organizations in enhancing social accountability. Unfortunately, I did look at your bio, so I'm going to say, DJ Michael, over to you.
Thanks, Josh. Those days, sadly, a little far away, but lovely to be here today. Thanks for the invitation. And maybe just to make that point that Ali and several of the speakers have made, that these elements of trust, of accountability, of inclusion are essential, at least in our perspective. And I represent this group of 9 donors, mostly philanthropic, who are supporting accountability work around the globe. To them, these concepts are essential to building healthier democracy, a healthier economy, and a healthy planet. And obviously, all of those goals interlink. And the Green Accountability Agenda is one vital piece of getting us towards that vision. And we've been documenting different ways in which civil society, framed in a broad way, contribute to effectively pushing for climate solutions that also benefit the communities. And that's an innovation role, it's a watchdog role, it's a delivery role, and probably more functions as well that come through that. And we're seeing that playing out to differing degrees, from the local level up to the national level, to the regional level, and then to the global level. And I had the chance to write a piece with Blair Glencourse of Accountability Lab that tries to unpack what accountability looks like at those different levels, if you're interested. One of the examples we cite, which others on this call know better than I, is at the local level, where engagement of communities in design of climate adaptation projects leads to better outcomes. So projects that have dual use, so they actually benefit communities on a day-to-day basis, but also provide spaces that can be genuine protections in the case of natural disasters and other forms of emergency that meet resilience targets. And if communities are engaged in the design and delivery of those projects, it leads to far more efficient, reduced leakages on budget, to the right quality than it would if they're not part of those processes. At the national level, we're going to see, I think this year, a lot of talk around country platforms, which I see different definitions of, but essentially mechanisms for how we agree on how funds that come in and climate finance that comes in at national level then are matched up against national needs and dispersed effectively and governed effectively. We know that accountability is going to be one important part of assuring that those country platforms function well. And we need people such as those on this call to be making that case so that these aren't just spaces where countries sit, country representatives sit purely with donor representatives, but we have a broader participation in that agenda setting and decision making and oversight. And then at the global level, there've been clear accountability gaps around on the donor side. And when you think about how long it took and how convoluted the process was to meet the 100 billion climate finance target that preceded the new collective quantified goal, and the machinations that various donors took to try and claim that they had met their contributions. And now we have a new goal that is barely a third of what many experts asked for. We're nowhere near that 1 trillion estimate that lower middle income countries need. But again, we need to think about what are the ways to hold donors accountable to deliver on those promises on time and effectively, and providing the forms of finance that allow countries to move quickly in addressing the climate solutions and accountably in doing so. So across the range, we see these accountability gaps, and that's going to require, as Josh hinted, at a partnership approach to deal with those. And we need more spaces where civil society, think tanks, academics, private sector, government, and donors come together and find ways to better understand each other's complementarities, build a shared knowledge agenda, understand the evidence base, agile ways of tracking what's working, what's not, and bridging different communities and understanding those different perspectives. So one example we've been working on is trying to bridge those who are working on climate taxes and the idea of how do we set up taxation that will speed the shift away from fossil fuels, or raise revenues that will help free up money to be spent on climate finance, but also bringing them into conversation with the tax justice community, which has a history working on assuring the tax systems are fairer, and helping foster a conversation about how do we raise revenue for climate action, but do it in a way that doesn't hurt or undermine equity. So it's these bridging roles that I think this community practice and other spaces that can play a vital role in helping build those shared approaches. But I do want to end by saying that it's the resourcing that we also need. Like, accountability doesn't come cheap. It can more than pay for itself. And I would point you to some of the research that Ali and I helped commission from the World Bank and TI that points to, like, there could be as much as 100 billion in savings every year when across the whole volume of climate finance. If we were to build in more effective transparency and accountability and participation, because you would have more efficient processes and better outcomes and reduced leakages and wastage. But still, making that case up front and getting more money to fund accountability work is proving a harder sell than it should be. When you look at the latest figures, I was just reading the Climate Works report, which shows US philanthropy investment in climate, and it's always a year behind. So for their 2023 data, they found that philanthropic funding to climate is somewhere in the range of 9.3 to 15.8 billion for that year. But that's out of a whole 885 billion that philanthropy gave away on a whole range of issues in 2023. So already climate is only a bare fraction of the volume of overall giving. And then when you look at, well, how much of that climate finance is going to issues like social accountability, there's no clear coding of that, which tells you something. Like, if they cared about it, they would have a way of measuring it. But also, when you look for keyword searches across the various grants and financing descriptions, we could only find around $75 million worth that explicitly reference these types of programming. So that would be less than 1% of just the climate philanthropic funding in the US, like being spent internationally, but coming from US sources. So it's a fraction of a fraction. And we know we need to scale this type of support. Official development assistance from the government donor side is no better. Overall, that's at a larger scale, but again, the amount being spent on the accountability dimensions is very small. And again, when you look at the localization piece, to us, a green accountability agenda is a localization agenda, because it essentially means we're getting more resources closer to the ground, further to the grassroots, because we think that means it will be used more effectively and aligned to community needs and rights. But again, the percentage that actually flows down to that local level is a small fraction of what's even coming in on this agenda. So we just put out a piece on looking at examples of funding intermediaries based in the Global South who have a track record of protecting rights and working and having strong local networks, but also can be partners in channeling funding to the grassroots, working on green accountability as well as other issues. And encouraging more northern-based funders to work through such partners as well as funding groups directly as a way of delivering on these shared objectives of localization and of accountable climate action. So we need more of that. And I think this community of practice can be one space where we try and educate the funder community, show the examples, show the vibrancy of what's being done across a range of issues, which is all too clear on the range of speakers and examples they're alluding to today. So we see it as part of our job to help lead that charge and bring more conversations within the funder community about supporting this important work. It's not going to happen by magic, but we need all of your stories and examples and passion to help make that come alive. And hopefully in a couple of years, we'll have a stronger story to tell on the financing side, but all the more so we'll have a whole series of stories to tell of impact on the ground of why green accountability matters. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Michael. I mean, just listening to you speak and thinking out loud that involves something like, understanding that involving communities leads to better outcomes. On the surface, seems like a self-evident truth, and yet there is this drive for empirical evidence to show this, which then does contribute to unlocking finance down the line. And just thinking about this community of practice as an excellent opportunity to actually do that through gathering the lessons and the evidence, having that empirical evidence from practitioners that the change does indeed come through involving communities and having them part of the broader discussion from the local level to the multilateral level. So thank you very much for that. At this point, I would like us to switch gears quite quickly. I'm keeping an eye on our time, and this is an important discussion, and hopefully we're all gaining from it. I would like to introduce Ms. Violet Chivutse, who's the Chair and Africa Regional Representative for one of our valued partners in this work that we're doing, the Huariou Commission. So, Ms. Violet, a warm welcome to you. The mic is yours.
Thank you so much. Am I clear?
Yes, you are. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Violet Chivutse. I am the Global Chair for Huariou Commission. And I'll start by introducing Huariou Commission. Huariou Commission is a global movement of grassroots women-led organization that was founded in Athens in Beijing. And one of the things that we have really been strong at is ensuring accountability, because as grassroots women, and I think this is a case that has been proven, we do so much in enhancing development at the local level, bringing the local expertise. We are the community of practice, but usually when it comes to how resources are used in government, which includes both financial and even the human resource that is supposed to support the work that we are doing, has actually been a problem in many situations. Climate change gave us an opportunity for us to drive this further by, first of all, creating our community of practice, which is beyond the members that we work with, reaching out to other members that are working on climate change adaptation, that are building resilient communities, most of them who are women. And what we have been experiencing is that there has been resources that are usually coming to the government. For example, my own country in Kenya, we have decentralized climate financing that comes up to the county level. And usually when this money comes, there has been no, like you just hear the money has been spent. But the grassroots working on issues of climate change adaptation that do irrigative agriculture and many aspects are never included in designing how this money is spent, or even how this money will be used, or even inform how much money exactly came. And we continue to suffer. You also know the other context that this is building from is that we as grassroots women, whether it's drought, it's flooding or what, we still have the task to provide food for our families, the caregiving role, which of course is continuously increasing because of the disasters that are coming due to climate change. So this provoked us to really take leadership in ensuring accountability, ensuring that we are part of the systems that make decision on how money is going to be spent, and also designing programs and making sure that the programs also fit in the existing programs that we have. I've been sharing with Glenn this today, this afternoon, this morning to some of you on how one of the initiatives that we began, which is called the Governor's Day with Farmers, which we got round to ensure we are understanding the budget that the county government has in climate change in agriculture. And as women, we mobilize other women to understand how this money has been spent, but we also collect the priorities of the farmers. For a series of like 3 months, there's discussion between the farmers, the policymakers, and then on the final day, we have the governor himself coming to respond to questions that the community and the farmers have, to say how the money that they have had have spent, what priorities, and the farmers also inform, these are the priorities that we want. We have other tools that we call local to local dialogue and many others on how we ensure transparency. We don't do it alone as grassroots women, but our leadership is able to bring other civil society organizations. Like in Kenya, we have Transparency International at the lowest level. We have Practical Action and others. And at the global level also, I think you understand we are part of this green accountability. We have been sharing this in meetings to lay down what are the principles of green accountability. How do we ensure that grassroots women who are on the forefront of building resilient communities are also aware of how much money is coming to the government and can be able to prioritize the needs that are realistic to the people. One of the things that I would say has been very challenging is that we may actually do this at the county level, but sometimes most partners who are especially the programs that are being funded directly to the government do not include the civil society in understanding this money. So it's really hard for us to hold governments accountable or to promote this accountability. On the other side is that as grassroots organization, we are actually really recognized much at the services that we give. But when it comes to the designing of the programs, it has been really something that we are struggling. So it is my recommendation that when we are talking about the green accountability, first of all, to recognize that the grassroots women is a big constituency, and we are actually organized through our own alliances, and we have other partners that we are working with, how to institutionalize the role, because that is really missing. Institutionalizing the role of grassroots women, the farmers, the community of practice in these systems that promote accountability is a problem. That's why when we come up with Governor's Day with Farmer, that is a day that is really on the annual calendar, that gives us an opportunity for consistency, because you can do it when there is a government leader that understands these things. And when they are transferred, consistency, again, starting to reinvent the wheel is a problem. The other thing is about equality, how to ensure that when we are working together with partners, whether these are the grassroots organizations that receive money, the government, we all start from a page of understanding we are all equal partners. We all matter in these programs that we are doing. And it's important for all of us to hold each other accountable. So what is missing is that we come to these programs as targets, as beneficiaries, and not as an agency that is supposed to be working with other partners, that is really on the ground, that understands the issues that we are working on. The other thing is how to ensure that the innovations, organizing especially, accountability cannot happen where there's no organizing. There must be organizing, and the grassroots women are organizing day to day, organizing as allies, understanding the government budgets, looking at the data, collecting data on how much money reaches the ground. And I think this also came from one speaker. How can we ensure that when we are looking at green accountability, we also value and invest in the organizing that the grassroots women have to do to be able to work together with the government? I think this is important, and not just capacity building where you are saying we want to train the grassroots women. What can grassroots women also train you from experience that they have been able to realize in the days that they are working? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Violet. And you raise a couple of important points. I mean, obviously, the examples you give are very much based in Kenya, but I think the experiences across the global south can echo this. And you make a really good point, especially because Kenya is a good case in point where we've got, since the promulgation of devolution in the new constitution, there's a very elaborate subnational governance structure. And whereas on the surface, this might seem to be very positive from a developmental perspective, we see how this could interact in a negative way when it comes and have a negative impact when it comes to accountability and the ability for communities to mobilize, but also trace resources that should be coming to them. So that, I think, is something worth thinking about. I like the point that you make around institutionalizing of grassroots groups, for example. And I know there are lots of institutions that do a lot of work around this, but I think the key to institutionalization and organization of these groups lends itself to, whether it's issues of equality, but also, harnessing resources, but also being able to articulate issues. And not just that, but also looking at grassroots groups as an incredible knowledge resource in terms of resilience, in terms of climate change, adaptation, and all of that. So thank you very much for your remarks. At this point, I think we have gone through our panel discussions. We are running a little bit late, but we are going to try and shift our agenda because we recognize the importance of the remarks that have come through. And we want to take a little bit of time just to address questions that might arise. We've got two questions that have come up so far. And I think the first one from Beatrice is probably best targeted to you, Michael, just for the position where you're sitting. And it's around the issue of how NGOs and social movements should reconfigure themselves in reaction to, here we are talking about Trump's policies because that's an immediate concern. But I think the reality is that we are seeing a broad shift across Europe as well, where a lot of the funding partners sit, where we are also seeing a shift to the right. And what level of reconfiguration do you see in terms of social movements work and NGOs in the work that they're doing, and what kind of impact will that have? And of course, Lauren is also asking, and this is to all these questions are to all our panelists, if you can chip in. For many community-based organizations and NPOs, resources are limited and reporting can be cumbersome. So what tools or simple metrics exist that can make social accountability reporting easier for organizations? I don't know, maybe Avelina from Mexico, you might have some examples of that, but again, it's open to all our panelists. But maybe I'll start with you, Michael, just on touching on some of these issues raised.
No, thanks, Josh, and great question. And sitting here in DC, it feels like a very live one. It's not a pretty picture, at least from a funding perspective, on the government donor side, as you mentioned. Like Europe it's already been slashing civil society funding, not explicit to green accountability, but across the board. And here in the US, you know, it's going to become very coded language that is needed to like survive what gets continued US support. That said, like I do think that's why innovations like Civic and funds that can flow through multilateral channels, because the one area where there is more money going in is actually through the multilateral donors. And they should have facilities that can support civil society as well as governments through that. And we need to be making the case to scale those. That's one response. The other I'd say is don't over pivot. Like I think there will be spaces where the, you know, countries will be making the case to be working in the ways that they want to, like the leadership of Brazil that we saw in the last G20, South Africa's ascendancy there now with the presidency role. I think there, you know, there can be a tendency to want to overreact, and actually, I think there are spaces and countries and coalitions that will still push the right agenda, and we need to be supporting that. And if others don't want to come and be part of that conversation, so be it. But there will be those who will. And so, yeah, that's my headline reaction. But I know others on this call will, certainly Ali, I'm sure from some of the conversations you've been having in Europe the past week, you may have more to say.
Yeah, please jump right in, Ali.
Yeah, sure. Look, I think these are great questions and fundamental questions we need to ask today. I think, you know, I mentioned and you know, our colleague from the government of Brazil, I think, said this very compellingly. You know, there's real need for thinking of a whole of society approach, how resources, if we're going to scale resources, are seen as effective in meeting broader social interests and goals. So there's a need for conversations that are highly local, but national, global, you know, that really reassess our values on what we want to see. And I think, Josh, you said this, that this is not a siloed conversation, that the development discussion, the economic livelihoods discussion, the climate discussion are one and the same. And I think our colleague from Brazil made this, but this is not clear to people. I mean, in the West or in the developed country, it's really still seen by many as a potential trade-off. And that's a narrative that will kill this agenda and honestly put us at existential risk. And a very technical, practical, financial standpoint, I think these are important questions. And I think we have to bring a lot of the social sector and civil society spending more adjacent to the bigger dollars. And a big part of that is through the MDB system and the development bank system. That's going to be the largest public finance resource available. I mean, there are going to need to be other pools, the pools that Michael talked about, the hundreds of billions of dollars in philanthropy a year are also critical. But can we use the formal public systems as a scaling agent? Can we tie this to how governments do business? And this is what we're proposing to do with Civic, is that we can't have these activities just in parallel. There is a Venn diagram where you need contestation, you need independent activities, but then you also need convergent activities. And as we renew the international financial architecture, and I think this is where all the groups here, whether it's governments, whether it's collectives like SouthSouthNorth, whether it's broad networks like Huariou, you know, or, you know, highly local organizations like our colleague from Cameroon who are representing people's voices, how do we channel expectations on financing? We talk about financing for development, but that doesn't just mean financing for governments. And I think that's where the discussion is really today. When we talk about financing for development, we make an assumption that governments and private capital are going to solve this problem alone. And if you look at how these kinds of complex social problems have been solved in the global north, let's say, it's only because there's been a robust participatory society. And so the assumption that in the developing world and the emerging markets that also wouldn't be necessary runs very much contrary to history. It's never happened anywhere. So why do we think that would be the case? And so I think we really need to go back to our history as well and these narratives which are very powerful. I'll close by saying I had this very similar conversation with Larry Kramer, who's the president of the London School of Economics. We had lunch last week, and he's one of the great thinkers and really reorienting the London School of Economics around what is a reimagination of global capitalism. And he was talking about the highly local has always been at the center of solving challenges for societies. He's also a historian and a lawyer. And so, I think we would also not only talking about contemporary cases, but perhaps we also need to go back to history sometimes, to understand how these things have worked. And I think the South African struggle is also a beautiful historical story about that. It wasn't just about government, even though, taking ownership of government was critical, but birthing a vibrant civil society during the apartheid struggle, which had also a lot of international financial support, but was highly local, led to something sustainable in the long run. We need to go back to a lot of these foundational stories.
Thank you very much, Ali. And thanks for your comment in the chat, Dr. Kaitani. I was actually going to come to you because, reflecting on all of this and the important position that Brazil holds. I mean, obviously COP30 this year, but also Brazil as a big global South voice. When you look at the geopolitical assumed vacuum that is coming up, I mean, what kind of space does Brazil, what opportunities does Brazil take in terms of leadership based on what is happening internally, but also the external view of things? Just a few words from you, maybe.
Well, thank you, Josh. We are looking for places that enable international dialogue. Given the fragility of multilateralism today, we need to look for other arenas, G20, BRICS, whatever, and we need to make room for the global South to be heard. And this is a mandate that I think that civil society is in a privileged position to carry this torch. Governments are not really the most energizers in these debates. And we hope, I'm sure that in Belém, we'll have the responsibility of providing space, opportunities, mechanisms to make civil society express itself. We own this to ourselves and to the international community. We were beneficiated by the opportunities that many other partners in the world provide to Brazil, and the environmental agenda in Brazil would not and will not succeed without international support. So the burden is on us now. I think that we'll have to find a way to create these opportunities, these places, these arenas, in order to take the best possible contribution that other non-state actors and other NGOs and third sector organizations can bring to the process. As I mentioned before, we're not in a good moment internationally speaking. In fact, we're in a critical juncture of the climate change debates now, and we hope to provide the best possible opportunity to make this discussion as productive, clear, and democratic as possible.
Thank you very much for that. There was also a broader question around how green accountability can foster fairer climate financing affecting communities in developing countries. And I think that very much speaks to the short presentation that you gave, Avelina, as well as you, Ms. Violet. So maybe touch on that briefly, reflecting on additional information or some of the information that you had presented as well.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. I think if we are speaking about a change in a model of development, we are also thinking about a change in how we measure development, and that's like kind of the core issues of not just the GDP measure, but also how we are speaking about climate change, and it's not just about reducing emission; it's just the benefits that brings to the people, and that has to be in terms of equity, in terms of poverty reduction. So it is like we need to bring another way of measuring, and that implies including communities in that discussion, and that's why we need to bring more bottom-up indicators that fits into the national conversation on how we are thinking in well-being and low emissions societies. So I think that's the change of in a model of development. Green accountability is like one of the core areas in which how we are thinking and imagining and measuring a new model of development. And that's why we are so happy to be a part of this community and initiative in order to bring all the knowledge of local organizations and local producers of how they are feeling the impacts of climate change and how to put that evidence for the public governments in order they can see how this can be better measured and improved.
Thank you so much, Avelina. Over to you, Violet, for a few thoughts before I come to you, Dr. Zoniziwa.
Thank you so much. Yes, I think the most important thing, as I had said, is to ensure that the green accountability is building on what the grassroots are already doing in promoting accountability, so that there can be consistency. And if there is some gaps in the interventions that the grassroots are doing, then we can actually be able to assess the gaps and strengthen. So it's about strengthening and not completely reinventing the wheel. And I also think that when we talk about institutionalization, it's not just institutionalization at my county level. I think this process should be even right from the discussions at the global, the systems that are being put in place from the global level down. And I think what Avilia has actually said, some of the things that we are doing as Huariou Commission with WRI is looking at how we can make this process right from the word go, to have the grassroots women be part of the designing how this green accountability should actually look like. So I think the design is also what is important. So it's not just what we just say inclusion. This is beyond inclusion. There has to be deliberate effort to learn and work together with the grassroots women in designing.
Thank you so much, Ms. Violet. Over to you, Zoniziwa. I'll give you the final word of the panel.
Well, what an honor. I definitely agree with what Violet shared. You know, it's all about the intentionality. You know, people can say it, but do they mean it? And this also reflects in the actions and the commitments that parties make. And just to use, you know, the same comments that I've shared in some of the responses about, you know, bring accountability in the most local definition, I would say it's all about citizen power. It's about our power. It's all about our agency, our ability to be part of conversations on issues that affects our lives. Because I mean, the whole discussion around, you know, climate change cannot be just if the people who are most affected are not there to really share their experiences. For example, when there is an incident of flood, you cannot sit in an office with air-conditioned security and all the emergency facilities to evacuate you, and then you're making decision of somebody who has experienced flood. You cannot be just. So the person who experienced that situation would be best to tell you, you know what, this is my reality, and in mitigating this, I believe that this is the best way to mitigate it. So it's just all about our power, our experiences, and also trusting, like what Ali had said, trusting in our solutions also, that we also are knowledgeable and we also are skilled, you know, to be part of the discussion and also be part of solution makers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think that's a really wonderful way for us to close off this session. Once again, a huge thank you to all of our panelists for the insights that you've given us. I think you've given us a wonderful global perspective that kind of segues nicely into us going to the nuts and bolts of what the purpose and objectives of our community of practice are, which I'm going to hand over to Hannah in a second. Just the one last task that I will ask of our retiring panelists is that please do keep an eye on the Q&A. I know a couple of you have been very kind to go ahead and answer any other questions that are emerging there. So do please keep an eye on that. And if you're able to chip in writing, that would be wonderful. We'll have a record of the responses that you've given there. And at the end of this, if there are any questions that remain unanswered in the post-coms, we'll make sure that those are answered and that the answers are shared as well. So anybody needing to keep on putting questions in the Q&A, please do not feel restrained. Go ahead and do that. Either our panelists or other members attending and speaking today will be able to answer those. Thank you very much. So over to switch gears now, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Hannah, our Community of Practice Manager, to talk to us a little bit about the purpose and objectives of our Community of Practice. Over to you, Hannah.
Thank you so much, Josh. I have prepared a presentation, so I will just quickly share my slides. I hope that I don't experience any technical difficulties. Just checking that you can see it clearly and that you can hear me.
Yes, we can, and we can see your slide. Please go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to all of our panelists for those really insightful remarks. I am definitely feeling quite inspired after those conversations. And it's really great to hear that there is a lot of interest in this community of practice. And we hope that the activities that are undertaken through this community of practice really do speak to advancing green accountability, especially in the Global South. So my presentation today is going to focus on the purpose and objectives of this community of practice, and we'll really just unpack how we intend to operationalize it and what our plan is going forward in terms of exploring some specific themes through this community of practice. And then lastly, I will also just comment on how you might get involved if you want to learn more, and how you can reach out to us to set up any meetings that you would like to have just to talk about potentially your involvement or how you can attend some of those meetings going forward. So what we are really aiming to do through this community of practice is to really facilitate knowledge exchange and peer learning. From one end, we really aim to elevate the voices of our grantees that are being supported through this project in the 5 project countries, to provide them a platform to advocate for what they are learning through their project implementation in their local context, to identify best practices on green accountability, but to also talk about what are some of the challenges that they are experiencing in their local contexts. And then on the other hand, we also aim to bring in external partners and experts that have experience working on green accountability projects to advocate for specific trainings and needs to elevate and scale up best practices on green accountability. So essentially, it's about creating a platform for peer-to-peer learning and knowledge generation to identify scalable green accountability social innovations. It's also about building partnerships and identifying coalition building strategies. We also want to create an inclusive space that integrates green accountability leaders and strategic actions to promote green accountability in strategic spaces, but also in their local context as well. So its objectives, it aims to create a space to convene practitioners as well as the global community to share lessons on testing social accountability mechanisms with a particular focus on climate finance. It also aims to cultivate a community of practitioners by connecting existing and new civil society networks to improve responsible climate finance provision. And lastly, and I think this is quite important, is that it aims to jointly advocate for matters of importance for social accountability and climate finance, and essentially help to elevate those voices and those practices into global decision-making processes. So in terms of its structure, as I said, we are supporting 25 grantees in 5 different countries through this community of practice, but also through the Green Accountability Platform project. And those grantees, as well as the consortium partners, which is World Resources Institute, SouthSouthNorth, and the Huariou Commission, essentially form what we're calling the core group of the community of practice. And this core group is really tasked with driving the agenda for the community of practice, for driving thought leadership and setting its agenda going forward. As I said, we want to create a really inclusive and safe space for these grantees to come together to learn and share about their project implementation and to build partnerships along the way as well. We also plan to develop affinity groups through the community of practice. And these affinity groups will focus on very specific themes related to different green accountability practices. Green accountability is quite a broad topic. We've spoken about how climate change and development are not siloed at all. It truly cuts across all sectors and all society. And I think green accountability really speaks to that as well. So we want to create spaces for tailored knowledge and tailored knowledge generation through this community of practice for our grantees that are working on specific topics. And I'll talk about what those themes are a little bit later. And then also we aim to bring in external knowledge and external partners to be part of the community of practice, both to share their knowledge and talk about their experiences in working in this space and offer tailored trainings on very specific wants and needs from our core group. But at the same time, we also aim to support these external partners in joining the community of practice meetings to learn from what our grantees are working on and what they are implementing on the ground. These grantees have really great experience in their local context. They have been doing work for several years in the space. So while they are implementing projects through this particular project, we also aim to cultivate a space where they can share their organizational experience as well. So through this structure, we really see this community of practice facilitating a two-way knowledge exchange and helping to build those really essential partnerships. So this slide provides you a bit of a snapshot of who our grantees are that we are supporting through the community of practice in our 5 project countries, which are Brazil, Cameroon, Mexico, Senegal, and Bangladesh. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to do a deep dive into each of these organizations, but I do encourage you to please look at their websites and look at the really amazing work that they have been doing on green accountability. You can also find more information on the Green Accountability Platform website, which gives a bit of an overview of what the different grantees are working on. You've already heard from Ms. Onoziwe, who's from Women for a Change in Cameroon, who is one of our grantees that's being supported through this project. So we're looking really forward to learning from that organization's wonderful expertise, particularly on gender. And as I said, we do intend or have created 3 affinity groups through the community of practice, which will focus on specific themes. And how we identify these themes was both through looking at what our grantees are really working on in their local contexts, but also what is happening globally in the context of green accountability and try to really align those themes. So our first affinity group is focusing on enabling greater transparency through data and information mechanisms and processes for civil society needs. Our second affinity group is going to look at enhancing advocacy and engagement channels for inclusive policy processes. And then lastly, we have a group that will be focusing on bolstering accountability through increased awareness raising and enhanced capacities related to climate finance. And essentially how these affinity groups will work is that we will have meetings approximately every second month where our grantees can choose to participate in one of the affinity groups or more that are aligned to what they're working on, and also to start identifying and integrating partners that have real expertise and knowledge to share in the space, or that would like to join to learn on very important topics. I think what's really important to state is that these three themes are also not siloed and they are interlinked. And I think it's going to be really interesting to investigate and see what comes out of these three themes and how they actually are all aligned and how green accountability truly does cut across many different societal needs. Something that's also very essential to our community of practice, and I think is quite a core value, is the theme of grassroots mobilization and ensuring that that really forms part of each of these affinity groups, because it truly is cross-cutting. And I think the panel discussion set it up really nicely, talking about how, you know, this is actually it's a matter of, it's truly our daily lives and our survival. And so how do we make sure that the livelihoods of local people are integrated into these practices around enhancing green accountability? Happening parallel to the community of practice, we will be developing a grassroots academy that will be run by the Huariou Commission. So I also encourage you to reach out to the Huariou Commission. We have Glenn online today, as well as Violet, to learn more about that process. But essentially, that grassroots academy will feed in very essential knowledge on grassroots themes and advocacy tools into this community of practice as well. And then just a little bit of a deeper dive into these three themes. I think we've spoken quite broadly around the concept of green accountability. We've also done a deep dive into several themes in the panel discussion. But I think with these three themes that we've identified, we really wanted to elevate the importance of advocating for transparency, for advocacy and engagement, as well as for enhancing capacities for climate finance. Around this theme of transparency, I think we all know that there has been a lot of talk around transparency, particularly in the UNFCCC processes with the enhanced transparency framework. But I think essentially transparency at a local level is about making information available to civil society that can really enhance their daily lives and inform their decision making. And in that way, having access to robust, timely, and accurate data and information is also a catalyst for good climate governance as well, and forms a framework to basically refer back to ensure that climate action is taken up. It also enhances transparent decision making and implementation and holds governments accountable to their climate commitments. At the same time, having access to timely data and information and transparent mechanisms for climate action helps to stimulate information, particularly in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And it also empowers civil society to hold governments accountable to their climate commitments. We have several grantees that are doing work on this theme. As I said, a lot of the work of the grantees that are supported through our community of practice is truly cross-cutting. So it's not to say that they're only focused on this theme. But for example, in Mexico, we have partners that are looking to improve transparency in public and private financing through a subnational sustainable finance index. And then in Brazil, one of our partners is creating a platform to provide training on environmental transparency for community leaders across Brazil. So again, I think this theme can be applied in many different contexts as well. And I think also ties in really nicely to the theme on climate finance and making sure that climate finance information is updated, is timely, accurate, but also available to all members of society. Our theme on enhancing advocacy and engagement channels for inclusive policy processes, I think really speaks to the need to elevate the voices of civil society to ensure that their needs are integrated into our climate change policy processes. And through that, through creating really robust engagement channels and ensuring inclusive design in policy processes, this can create and enhance the design of policies for effective implementation. It also helps to build ownership in policy review, planning, and implementation. I think very importantly, having really great advocacy and engagement channels can help to foster trust and partnership building between government and civil society. I think without having trust in those strong partnerships set from the beginning, it's really impossible to implement climate action without protest. It also helps to instill a sense of ownership and pride among communities. We know that if we involve civil society in government processes, if they are integrated into decision-making processes, their uptake in terms of monitoring, evaluation, and actually management of those processes themselves are likely to be taken up. And then in terms of what some of our grantees are doing on the ground, in Senegal, some of our partners are building the capacity of civil society organizations to better monitor the implementation of the national strategy for the management of mangrove ecosystems. And then in Cameroon, I'm now talking again about Women for a Change. That organization will map and assess women and CSOs' needs, strengths and challenges in accessing climate finance, as well as engagement in climate change processes. So I think, again, just showing some examples of what our grantees are doing on the ground really speaks to how this theme of green accountability does cut across many different sectors and can be applied both in the mitigation space and adaptation space, and of course is very much applicable to the responsible expenditure of climate finance. And that leads me on to our last theme, which focuses on increasing awareness raising as well as enhanced capacities related to climate finance. So I think this is really about creating inclusive processes for civil society to be engaged in budgeting processes, but also at the same time, it's about capacitating sub-national actors to successfully procure climate finance. I think there is a lot of misunderstanding around climate finance processes and many hurdles we know for global South countries in terms of having access to finance, as well as the affordability of climate finance. So I think this theme is really about increasing those capacities to procure finance, but also awareness raising on what climate finance is and how it can be procured. In terms of participation, this can help to inform better decision making. Increased participation and transparency of climate finance can also help ensure that climate finance is being channeled to where it is most needed. It can also enhance the financial risk management, which will contribute to overall financial stability, which is truly integral to the sustainability of global South countries. And then lastly, it also ensures that financial management processes are inclusive, robust, fair, and very important, void of corruption. And one key example from our grantees in Bangladesh, they are working to build the capacity of local governments in coastal Bangladesh to transform and implement conventional budget and plans into climate resilient ones through locally led actions. And they will also document evidence to empower local governments to access national climate finance. I think what's also important just to emphasize in terms of what our grantees are working on is that there's a lot of conversation talk around the importance of green accountability in the national space and also in global processes like the UNFCCC. But at the same time, we have to integrate sub-national governments into these conversations as well, because climate action does happen at the local level. And I think this community of practice is truly advocating for that climate action. And then lastly, just to really advocate for your participation in our community of practice going forward. As I said before, it will help to identify scalable, emphasis I think on scalable green accountability innovations, and build coalitions to drive meaningful change. So through this platform, we hope to facilitate a space where you can connect with like-minded individuals and also strengthen the impact of your own work by sharing it with the broader community of practice. And also find those opportunities for peer-to-peer learning, knowledge sharing, and collaborative action. It will also be a space for you to co-create knowledge. So I think while it will also facilitate knowledge exchange, I think this platform will also help to build new ideas about what can be done and what type of partnerships we need going forward. Advocacy, I think, is really important. I think this space will really allow for voices to be heard that maybe otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity. And it's a space to really amplify the work that you are doing so that it is shared broadly and really integrated into other local contexts as well. And then I think I also just want to mention about training and resources. that is something we really want to integrate into the community of practice. So while it will be a space for knowledge sharing, I think it's also a place for really specific and tailored trainings and learnings for both our grantees as well as our external partners as well. So if you have any further information on this community of practice or would like to be a part of it, there are 2 channels by which you can get involved. So I do encourage you to look at the Green Accountability Platform website, which will give you a little bit more information and a deeper dive into what the grantees are working on. We also have an EOI form, expression of interest form on the platform that you can fill out, and we do monitor those inputs regularly, so we can reach out to you once that is done. But you can also reach out to me directly. I am working as the Community of Practice Manager, so my email is there given on the screen. And if you'd like to set up a one-on-one meeting or learn more about our community of practice, I'm happy to take that conversation up on email or in a one-on-one meeting. So I hope that gives a little bit more background into how we intend to operationalize this community of practice, and what our true intention is with creating the space and our sustainability of it going forward. I think that's also integral and key to this work, is that we wanted to extend beyond 2025, and that this work really can be upscaled into important decision-making conversations. So I'm going to close, and thank you so much to everybody, and I'll hand back to Josh. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. And as Hannah mentioned, if you check in the chat, there are several useful links that we have shared. And a special thank you to you, Michael, as well. You've shared some really good links. So I'd encourage our participants to take a look, click on those links and save them for more information and more resources. At this point, I'd like to apologize because I'm cutting out our conference break. I hope you'll all indulge me that we are running a little bit behind time, but you've heard enough of my voice. I'd like to hand over to the more dulcet tones of Glenn, my colleague from Huariou Commission, to kind of take over from here, to introduce us to the next discussion that we are going to have, which is around opportunities for network building and collaboration. I do apologize. We've left a little less time than we had anticipated, Glenn, but over to you.
Good. Thank you for that warm welcome. I'll do my best to be dulcet. I don't know that I ever have been. I think that this last session to me is tremendously important because now we've heard such a rich overview, so many rich perspectives and framings of the issues of accountability, the ways they're being approached, so many different scales. This is vastly complex, not just because of the climate issue, not just because of climate challenges, not just because of the challenges in social accountability, but because of the many different scales at which pursuing accountability really operates. We've heard everything about building trust with within the public sector, building and institutionalizing relationships with multilateral development banks and with the UNFCCC. So we see that even just around this room, there's such a diversity of understandings of what accountability means and what each of us takes as a starting point and a jumping off point. So in this session, we're going to look a bit more closely at, I think is a very important operational aspect, and that is what is civil society's role in building networks and movements for advancing green accountability. And we're joined by 2 excellent practitioners and leaders in their own right. We're joined by Mr. Mohammed Razu Ahmed Masoom, he's the country engagement lead with WRI and comes with a depth of experience in community organizing around issues of climate justice. And we're also joined by Sandra Guzman from Grupo de Financiamiento Climático para Latinoamérica y el Caribe, who will speak on the experience in Mexico. So I'd like to give each of you the 5 minutes that you've been allocated, but maybe if you can try and be as concise as possible. And if you could emphasize the aspects of, what are the opportunities we have for building movement? How do we get those networks in place? This community of practice is a vital space to do that. So Please, Rasu, if we can begin with you, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Glenn. Yeah, I totally agree with you. The last session gives us a huge overview about the course of actions, so that make my life a bit easy. My experience is with Bangladeshi CSOs along with few Asian CSOs, because my last organization was Oxfam, and I closely work with few Oxfam Asia country team and their networks across the Asia. But in terms of my very hardcore experience with the Bangladeshi CSOs at the grassroots level, like when I worked for the Transparency International Bangladesh, they were kind of coordinating the largest network of the civil society organization at the grassroots levels. But the thing is, we figure it out like it's not about Bangladesh context as well. It's probably similar many other South Asian countries, like the grassroots movements is a little behind from what is happening at the global level discussion. So I can see like there are a lot of grassroots networks. They are concerned about climate finance, but they really don't know how it is progressing and how things are evolving at the policy level. So I can see there is a very straightforward disconnect in between local networks and the policy level. So, and even if I go for a very recent examples, like this year Bangladesh supposed to revise their nationally determined contribution plan, NDC plan, and right at this moment we have a very prominent CSO leader at the chair of the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. But I was trying to communicate with all of our grantees along with many other allies, even CAN network in Bangladesh as well. No one has any idea what is happening at the ministry level. And so this is a kind of real sort of example, like Bangladesh. When we talk about Bangladesh, we can see Bangladesh is always at the forefront of the climate justice movement at the global level. Bangladesh, played a excellent leadership role last decade at the COP process as well on behalf of LDCs and G77 China. But here at the practice level, we can see there is a very straightforward gap with the CSOs and government and the policymakers. So although even when a CSO person leader is in the position as well, so I can see a opportunity that there are a lot of networks active at the country level, but we can see the problem is there is no collaboration and connection in between. So I could be wrong, but my perception is the problem is CSO's role and their activism role turned into a very kind of development funding basis project work. So this is a kind of silo that made CSO scattered, like different funding channels coming, building different sort of channels, and they are doing their own things, and they really don't have any connection in between. And that's why there is no kind of one voice coming out from the climate activist group from the country level. So this is what I can see a real opportunity of thinking in future. Like probably, I think the networks, the people, they know each other, but we need to find a kind of point of harmony, how they can exchange their experience and collaborate each other. So it could be it can come up with the even funders channel too, like how do they coordinate is also significant, how they mobilize CSO networks is being coordinated, because it sounds a bit harsh, but it's becoming a reality nowadays, I believe. On the other hand, like when I worked in Transparency International, I had really very good experience with the Bangladeshi CSOs, because they are keen to know how they can come up, but I found like their problem is their capacity. So holding a placard at the community level doesn't make any sense at the COP decision making processes. So what CSOs are doing, they are holding it, but they don't know how to communicate it to the global level. And another significant problem I figured out, like I'm trying to going a bit quick, like, yeah. So the thing is like how the national level climate fund is mobilizing and how it is being prioritized. There is no rational indicator. There is no means of, kind of verification how this level of fund will go for that level of climate work. So when we worked that time, like it was a kind of, again, it was an internationally, supported program. We tried a bit and then it stopped. So that time we tried to track a kind of 100 of, climate funded projects driven from Bangladesh national government. And we try to figure it out, like what are the governance challenges related to, what are the transparency challenges, what are the problem with the participation of the grassroots people with these funding projects, and what are the accountability and other sort of challenges we figured out. So this sort of work is really needed at a large scale. So we piloted and we can see, like, yeah, although sometimes political government and their power structure are not comfortable with this sort of nitty-gritty level assessment, but it really gives a good sense of I think how we can improve and where we need to emphasize to improve. So I can see a lot of spaces still existing for CSOs. We can improve. We have good platforms, but we really have some sort of spaces where we can still emphasize on and improve our efforts towards the climate justice movement coming up to the next level of fight when US pulled out their yeah. Over to you, Glenn. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, Rasu. I'll let's move immediately to Sandra, and then we'll open up again for a moment. Sandra, please share with us your experience from Mexico.
Thank you so much, Glenn. I hope you can hear me well. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. I would like to emphasize a couple of things in knowing that we have a little bit of time and we are running out of it. But I would like to emphasize that in GFLAG, which is an organization that actually was created to improve the transparency, particularly tracking climate finance, there are several lessons that we have been learning. But the very, very first thing is that definitely for us, transparency and accountability are critical to increase trust across stakeholders. And it is very difficult to have trust when we are living in a not only in a region, but also in a world with so many inequalities. But for us, it was very difficult to see that when we talk about climate finance, for instance, it's not only about how much we are investing to protect nature, to reduce emissions, but it's actually how much countries are still investing in causing the problem. The fact that our region, as well as in Africa, in Asia, we have this extractive model where most of the money is going, is telling us that we are not deeply in understanding what needs to change. That's why for us, it's very, very important in all this process to understand how or what is the relationship or the connection between flows and needs. It is very important, first of all, to have a better understanding about how we are going to transform the system where we live, how we are going to transform and how we are going to tackle those needs if we do not understand those needs. And when I talk about needs, it's not only about what the government needs to transit towards a more sustainable system, but it's actually what communities need, what the private sector need, what different actors need to actually achieve those transformations, considering that we are living in a model that has been pursuing and continuing this extractive system. That's why the transparency is a very important tool, as well as the accountability, to have a better understanding. Where are we standing? Where is the money? Who is receiving the money? And then identify those solutions, those mechanisms, those technologies, those practices, to then starting like those investments or transferring those investments. And sometimes, and I have been saying this in different moments, sometimes it's not even a matter of more money, but it's better money. How we are going to take this money that is invested in this model to then transfer to that model that will actually help us to transit and to really take care of these communities at all levels. So I think one word that for me is very important in all this process is the empowerment. it's very, very important to empower entities at all levels. Not only in national governments, but particularly local governments. It is true that there are very limited capacities when it comes to tracking, monitoring. Actually, we have been working with a lot of local governments that don't have the capacity because they don't have the people to conduct this type of analysis. Actually, now we are in a process tracking climate finance flows at the local level in the 32 states in Mexico. And you may imagine, like, well, its governments, they should have, like the resources or the capacities to track, and actually they don't. And that's why it's important to continue this empowerment and a constant capacity building. And when I'm talking about capacity, it's not only like a one-time thing. No, it is important to consider this transparency and accountability and creating of these capacities as a process. It's a constant process because this information evolves all the time, and we may identify certain practices now that will improve next year. So that's why this empowerment at all levels is very important. Of course, it is critical to work with governments because at the end of the day, it's their job, it's their responsibility to provide this information. It's part of their commitments. But I would say that it's very, very, very important to continue this strengthening in terms of the collaboration across civil society, with academia, as well as with local communities. And I just want to give you an example. GFLAG, which is this organization that was built 12 years ago, we started from scratch, learning by doing, like analyzing public budgets to identify to what extent Mexico at that time was mainstreaming climate change in the public expenditure. And so we developed our own methodology, and we have been improving that methodology year by year. Now, this methodology is the base of the Sustainable Finance Index, which is this tool that we have been implementing for the last 5 years. And we are very proud to say that this index has been now implemented by countries itself. The governments are using our tool to introduce like this type of understanding: where is the money, where are the needs, and where are the gaps. And what I would like to emphasize is that the knowledge that we are creating as civil society is very important because our knowledge can be the knowledge of our countries. And actually, something that I also would like to share is that now we have been identifying these opportunities. Now the index will be implemented not only in Latin America, but actually we are going to implement this index in Africa. And this emphasizes what the colleagues mentioned at the beginning. The problems that we are facing in the Global South are so common. What we observe in terms of the needs in Latin America are very similar in Africa and Asia. So that's why I see this community as a great opportunity to improve this South-South collaboration, to increase our sharing experiences, sharing knowledge, and really create like tools that will help us to improve and to really change and influence the decision-making processes, because it is exactly what we need. Be more like not only inclusive, but also transformative, bringing more and more solutions. And we have the knowledge, so it's a very important opportunity to share this knowledge with governments and other entities to, at the end of the day, work together, because climate change and all these problems are very, very important for all of us. And we need every single person on board to make this transformation. So I would like to leave it there, Glenn, and thank you so much for the invitation. Glenn, I think you are on mute.
Yes. So thank you very much, Sandra, for the very practical example of how you use information to then generate the sorts of momentum and accountabilities that can then be scaled up and replicated. And Rosario, I particularly appreciated your reflections on our own coordination mechanism. So I'll just close my part of the of this session by really recognizing the function of a community of practice really is to build spaces for collaboration, to recognize the value of collective action. We've heard a bit about aggregation. We've heard about building trust. We've heard about building on existing mechanisms. The value that we have, for me personally, I'll speak with I statements. For instance, I took away very concrete things from many of the speakers that I can use immediately. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. I know that, for instance, Michael described all this analysis that's been done on the role of intermediaries. I don't have to do that now. That's great news. I know that there's organizations that have actually unpacked the UNFCCC mechanisms and can share that with our groups in ways they haven't. And I know very well through working with Violet and Grassroots that there are extensive networks in place that are really driving change at the local level. And I think, Razu, you pointed out to the importance of this connective tissue of, you've got networks here, you've got networks there. So my aspiration is that through this group of 25 implementing partners that are funded through the GPSA and World Bank, and through this group of allies who've come together to see what we can learn, that we really do feel that there's a sense of solidarity. We're not in it alone, and our voice is much greater and more impactful. And I hope, building on Violet's point, that this sort of work is institutionalized. This becomes the way that we build trust to continue to collaborate as a society. So I will leave my comments there and return the microphone to you, Josh, and with apologies to Dr. Gaetani for keeping you over time now.
Thank you very much, Glenn, and what a wonderful way for us to get to the point of wrapping up. Ali, I'm going to impose on you. I did send you a message, but I was wondering if you are still around. I'd very much like to come to you to literally say a couple of words right at the end to close us off. I would really, really appreciate that. But from our side, at least from the side of our partners, before I come to you, is just to say on behalf of Huariou Commission and WRI and SSN, thank you to everybody for being here, and happy to hand over to you, Ali, for a few closing remarks. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Josh. Sorry for that. No, I think thank you. All the speakers said it best. I think what we hear today that is most compelling, for us and why we funded this work in the first place is this integration, this local to global vertical integration. I mean, I think that's what excites us most about this community of practice. And I think it's a start and it's a get-go. And I think what we're showing here today in these discussions is that the art and the science of transparency, participation, accountability is a core part of development. It needs to be financed. It needs to be mobilized. We can't take this as something that just happens as a external relations exercise, a general stakeholder engagement exercise. This is about building an architecture. It's about building systems. So I would really encourage this kind of thinking to really imbue the discussions that are happening around global climate finance, around the renewal of development finance, that when we talk about civil society, we're not just talking about having meetings in Paris and London and then in the capitals, consulting folks on policy documents. What we see, the examples of work, and honestly, this is often coming up. Honestly, I had a side discussion about this just coming up. And we have to show that there is a real systems building work that's already happening at the world, all over the world, with incredible capacity, and they're scalable. So I think this is a beautiful community of practice. Congratulations to SouthSouthNorth for building it with such vision and rigor. And we want it to very much outlive the life of this project and be replicated. So the expectations are high, but I think when we think of the aspirations we had when we started all this work, this is the exact kind of visioning we need. And so really thank you for having me and for putting together sort of some of the best brain trust we have in the world from local to global to think about this. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And thanks again for your continued support and for your partnership going forward. And thank you to all of our partners. But I think most importantly, thank you to every single one of you who took the time to join us. I know it's been a long session. We're a little over time, but I think the discussions do merit the time that we've taken to have them. This is the beginning of the conversation. We hope to have lots more conversations. There will be post-coms that will share the resources and everything and links in terms of how to further engage with us. And we look forward to another opportunity to engage with you all. Thank you all very much. Have a lovely day. Have a lovely evening, and see you again soon. Bye-bye.